I never expected my inheritance to make my divorced parents team up and take me to court. They worked together flawlessly, making me wish they'd done that sooner. But now there's only evidence of their abandonment. I'm 30 now, and if you'd asked me at 15 who my parents were, I might have given you two different answers on 2 different days. Because they didn't fight for me. Not in the divorce, not in the aftermath, not once. I was 10 when they split, and I still remember sitting on that sticky leather bench outside the courtroom, swinging my legs back and forth while they argued over furniture and car payments. Not once did anyone bring up where I would go. No visitation schedule, no custody debate, no teary arguments about who loved me more. Just silence. Like I was the afterthought neither wanted to claim. The judge eventually had to literally stop the proceedings and ask, who's taking custody of the child? My dad looked at my mom. She looked at him. And then, in the most casual voice I've ever heard, my mom shrugged and said, "He's probably better off with your sister. She's stable." That was the first time I realized I was optional. My aunt, God bless her, took me in without a second thought. She wasn't rich, far from it, but she gave me a room, hot meals, and the kind of consistency my parents couldn't even fake. Aunt Marie was the one who sat through every parent-teacher conference, who stood clapping in the back row at my high school graduation, who quietly handed me a box of tissues when I didn't get into my first-choice college. She never tried to play the mom role. She just showed up. And after a while, I stopped looking at the door, hoping someone else would. I wish I could say my parents just drifted away after that. But drifting implies some softness. What happened was more like a blackout. No phone calls on birthdays, no cards on Christmas, no awkward check-ins or half-hearted apologies, just nothing. My dad moved out of state within 6 months, remarried a woman with 2 daughters, and acted like he'd been born into a ready-made family. My mom floated around. New boyfriends, new jobs, new versions of herself that never lasted longer than a year. Every now and then, I'd get a friend request from her on some new social media account, usually followed by a comment on one of my photos like, "You look just like your uncle," as if that counted as parenting. I learned to stop expecting them to care. That's not bitterness talking, it's just math. If someone disappears from your life long enough, you stop marking their absence. You build a life around the gap. And that's what I did. I went to community college on a scholarship, worked 2 part-time jobs, and eventually got into a decent university. I majored in finance, interned at a small investment firm, and worked my way up from guy who prints reports to guy who actually makes decisions. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I made a life out of the scraps they left behind. I didn't need them. But here's where things get weird. A year ago, my grandfather, my dad's dad, passed away. We weren't close, but we'd kept in touch. He'd call me on my birthday, send those stiff Hallmark cards with a $50 check tucked inside. Every now and then, we'd meet for lunch. He was gruff, old-fashioned, and said computer people like it was a species, but he never once forgot I existed. I always figured his money would go to my dad, or maybe to my uncle who lived nearby and helped him with errands. But when the lawyer called me in for the reading of the will, I found out something that knocked the wind out of me. He left everything to me. All of it. The house, the savings, the investment accounts, the lake property in Michigan, I didn't even know existed. After taxes, it totaled just under $1.3 million. The will was ironclad. His lawyer made sure of it. There was no loophole, no clause, no shared with the family stipulation. Just my name. Sole beneficiary. I sat there blinking at the papers, not even sure how to react. I wasn't used to being chosen. I should have known that kind of money wouldn't stay quiet for long. The first call came from my dad's new wife, Lynn. We'd spoken maybe twice in my life, both times painfully awkward, with her acting like I was some long-lost cousin she couldn't quite place. This time, though, her voice was syrupy sweet. "Andrew, oh, honey, I just heard the news. Isn't it wonderful? Your grandfather always loved you so much." I remember pausing for a beat. "Thanks." "Yeah, it was unexpected." "Well," she said with a little laugh, "I'm sure you're already thinking about how to take care of your family with that blessing. Your father's been struggling since the layoffs, and the girls are both starting college soon. You know how expensive that is." I didn't say anything. I just stared at the phone like it had grown teeth. She continued undeterred. "Anyway, your dad's too proud to ask, but I thought I'd reach out. Even just a small monthly stipend would mean the world to us. Maybe 2003. You could set it up through Zelle, whatever's easiest." I think I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was surreal. I hadn't heard from my dad in over a decade. No birthday texts, no graduation card, not even a good luck when I moved cities. And now I was supposed to sponsor his household. Sorry, I finally said. I'm not comfortable with that. There was a pause. Then the sweet tone disappeared like it had been peeled off. You've always been so selfish, Andrew. That one got under my skin a little, but I didn't respond. I just ended the call. 2 days later, my dad called himself. First time since I was 12. No greeting, just jumped right in. So what's this I hear about your inheritance? I kept it short. Grandpa left it to me. All of it. Yeah, he sighed. You know that's not right. Maybe not. I said, but it's legal. You think this makes up for everything. You think money erases the fact that you abandoned your family. That one stopped me cold. I abandoned you. You cut us off. You never reached out. You never even tried to be part of my life after the divorce. I blinked, stunned. I was 10. He didn't say anything for a second. Then, like he hadn't heard me, he just kept going. And now you're sitting on a fortune while we're drowning. You could help, but you won't because you're spiteful. I hung up. It didn't stop there. My mom found out a week later, probably from some cousin she still talked to. Her approach was different. She didn't ask for money directly. Instead, she started sending me guilt-soaked texts about how hard her life had been. Screenshots of overdue bills, photos of her new husband looking depressed on the couch, even a selfie of her crying with the caption, "I just can't believe you don't care." I ignored most of it until one night when she left a voicemail I'll never forget. Her voice was sharp, accusatory, practically shaking with rage. You think you're better than us now, huh? Sitting there with your big inheritance judging everyone? I gave you life. I carried you for 9 months and you can't even spare a few dollars to help your mother. Maybe I should have fought harder in court. Maybe then you wouldn't have turned out so cold. I replayed that message 4 times. Not because I was unsure how I felt. I knew exactly how I felt. I just wanted to burn her words into my brain so I'd never forget them the next time I doubted myself. That's when the Facebook post started. The Facebook post started small. My mom posted a photo of me as a baby me in a tiny blue onesie, holding her finger with the caption, "No matter how old they get, they're still your baby." Some kids just forget where they come from. I knew it was about me. I was her only child, but I didn't bite. A few days later, she escalated. A grainy picture of her and me from a zoo trip probably taken when I was around 7. Caption: I raised him alone for years. Sacrificed everything. Some people forget all you did for them the second they come into money. Just sad. That one got traction. Relatives started commenting, distant cousins, old family friends, people who hadn't seen me in a decade. You were always such a good mom. He'll come around eventually. They all do. Kids these days know gratitude. I watched it unfold like a car crash in slow motion. My phone buzzed nonstop. Friend requests, messages, DMs from people asking if I was really the one who inherited all that money. One woman, an old friend of my mom's I hadn't seen since I was 9, sent me her Venmo handle and said she was raising money for a new car. No context, no shame. Then came my half-sisters. I'd never met them. My dad remarried when I was 11 and I was never invited to the wedding. I knew their names, Samantha and Grace, but they were just trivia facts I kept stored somewhere behind my childhood trauma and the taste of powdered school lunches. But now they wanted to bond. Samantha messaged me first. She was 19 and in her second year of college. Her message was long and sugary, full of "hey big brother" energy. She said she'd always wanted to connect, but Dad thought it would be too complicated. She mentioned how she and Grace were both struggling with tuition and how amazing it was that I'd come into such a big blessing. She said, maybe this is the universe giving us a second chance to be a real family. I stared at that sentence for a while. A real family. When had we ever been that I didn't respond right away? I was still trying to process everything. But it didn't matter because Grace, the younger one, went straight to Instagram. She posted a TikTok-style video of herself fake crying with text on screen that read, "When your rich brother won't help you with college, even though he just inherited $1.3 million. And the caption, "But family's supposed to mean something, right?" It went semi-viral. I saw people tagging me by name. Strangers messaged me calling me selfish. Some guy told me I was letting generational wealth rot. One woman sent me a picture of her student debt balance and said, "At least I would use it to help others." As if I owed the world for being chosen by a man who saw value in me when no one else did. At that point, I started deleting apps off my phone, but it didn't stop the real-world consequences. Aunt Marie called me one evening. She was quiet at first, her voice tight. I knew that voice. It was the one she used when she was trying not to cry. "I got a letter today," she said. I sat up straighter. "From who?" "Your father." He sent it through certified mail. Said he wants to contest the will. My stomach dropped. He can't. It's legally solid. She sighed. I know, but that doesn't mean he won't try. He said he's gathering evidence to prove your grandfather wasn't of sound mind when he made it, that you manipulated him in his old age. I felt the blood rush to my face. What evidence? I barely saw Grandpa once a month. He made the choice himself. I know that, Andrew. I do. But your dad's angry. And when people like him are angry, they don't care about the truth. That was the moment the floor started to shift under me. Because now it wasn't just awkward messages and petty guilt trips. It was legal. It was war. And I was the target. Over the next few weeks, letters started arriving. From lawyers, from family members, from people claiming to be concerned about the distribution of assets. One guy even be Grandpa's business partner and said he was owed money. None of it held up legally, but it was draining. Every time I thought it was over, another envelope appeared in my mailbox. And through it all, my mom stayed busy online. She started a GoFundMe titled Single Mom of 30 Years Facing Eviction Family Abandonment Story. The page had photos of her looking frail and dramatic, along with a long embellished story about how she raised a boy alone after his deadbeat father disappeared and how money changed him into someone cruel and heartless. She never used my name, but it was obvious. The comments were filled with people asking, "Is this about Andrew? The one who got the inheritance?" Someone even posted a link to an article about Grandpa's estate. Then one day I came home to find a man sitting on the steps outside my apartment building. He was in his 50s, heavy-set, wearing a tattered leather jacket and holding a clipboard. He looked up when he saw me. Andrew Morris. I nodded slowly. You've been served. He handed me a manila envelope and walked away. Inside was the lawsuit. My father was officially contesting the will, alleging undue influence, claiming I coerced my grandfather into leaving me everything. It was filled with vague language and flimsy claims. Andrew frequently visited his grandfather in private. Andrew has a history of manipulation and selfish behavior. There is reason to believe Andrew took advantage of an elderly man with declining mental faculties. I sat on the couch for hours, just staring at the pages. My whole body felt numb. This wasn't just a fight over money now, it was an attack on my character. A public legal attempt to paint me as some kind of scheming villain. I called Aunt Marie again that night. She was furious, said she'd help however she could, but I could tell it scared her too. And just when I thought I'd hit the worst of it, something happened that turned everything upside down. One Saturday morning, I got a knock at the door. Not unusual, except it was 7:15 a.m. and I hadn't ordered anything. When I opened it, I found Samantha standing there, in person, with a duffel bag slung over her shoulder and tears in her eyes. Dad kicked me out, she said. He said if I wasn't going to help him take you to court, I didn't deserve to live in his house. I blinked. What? He found out I messaged you, that I asked you not for money but for a relationship. He said I betrayed the family, and now I have nowhere else to go. I just stared at her, stunned. I hadn't even responded to her original message. I didn't know how to handle this. I barely knew her, and yet here she was on my doorstep, a casualty of the same man who was now trying to destroy me in court. She must have seen the hesitation in my face, because she looked down and whispered, I didn't think you'd let me in. I just didn't know where else to go. I opened the door. That night, as she slept on the couch, I sat by the window trying to untangle everything. My mom was playing the victim online, collecting sympathy dollars by the dozen. My dad was dragging me into court, hell-bent on rewriting history and stealing what was left of my peace. And now his daughter, his other child, was asleep on my couch because she dared to see me as a person, not a bank account. That's when something in me snapped. Not in a loud, dramatic way. Just a quiet click, like the sound of a lock turning. This wasn't just a family feud anymore. It wasn't about inheritance. It wasn't about fairness. It was about control. About people who thought they could discard me, forget me, and then come crawling back the second I had something they wanted. And the worst part, they expected me to feel guilty for saying no. Well, I was done feeling guilty. But before I made my next move, I had to gather my own evidence. And once I did, I knew exactly how I'd fight back. When you think of rock bottom, you usually imagine something loud. A crash, a scream, a door slamming so hard it echoes. But mine came quietly, like the air slowly thinning out in a room, until one day you realize you're choking and no one even noticed. It wasn't one big thing that broke me. It was 100 little ones, like the way I started avoiding my mailbox because every time I opened it there was a new envelope Legal documents, accusations, even a threatening letter once from someone claiming to be a friend of the family warning me that karma always finds greedy people. Like the time I walked into the grocery store and heard two old women whispering about me near the produce aisle. One of them saying he's the one who took all the money and left his poor mother to suffer. Or when my mom posted a status claiming I had stolen from my dying grandfather and refused to pay for her life-saving surgery. That spoiler alert didn't even exist. I was drowning in lies. And worse, no one seemed interested in the truth. Aunt Marie was my only anchor. She offered to pay for a lawyer even though I knew she couldn't afford it. I thanked her, hugged her, and said I'd be okay. Then I went home and stared at the ceiling until my eyes burned. The truth was, I wasn't okay. I was barely eating. I couldn't sleep without having dreams where my grandfather was disappointed in me shaking his head in that same recliner chair he used to nap in. I stopped returning calls. I pulled away from friends. Even Samantha, who was still crashing on my couch, started noticing. One night, she tiptoed into the kitchen while I was sitting in the dark eating cereal for dinner like a ghost. "Andrew," she said softly, "you don't have to do this alone." I looked up. My spoon hovered over the bowl. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust that anyone was in my corner. But all I could think about was how everyone who had ever claimed to love me eventually saw me as a transaction. "You're not them," she added quickly, as if she could hear my thoughts. "You're not like Dad. You don't know him anything." And for the first time in weeks, I let myself cry. Not the quiet, dignified kind, the ugly kind, the kind that rips something loose inside you and leaves a crater behind. Samantha just sat beside me and handed me a napkin. That was the turning point. Not the revenge, not the legal strategy, not the comeback, just the cry. Just letting myself be human for once, after weeks of being treated like a villain. After that night, I knew I needed to climb out, not for them, not even to prove anything, but because I couldn't keep living like I was still 10 years old, waiting for people who didn't want me to finally want me. The first thing I did was find a therapist. It felt weird at first telling a stranger all my family's dysfunction, but over time those sessions became lifelines. We talked about grief, about abandonment, about how I'd carried the weight of being unwanted for so long. It felt normal. Like I didn't even deserve good things unless I was willing to bleed for them. She helped me see how I kept trying to earn love from people who treated it like a reward I had to beg for. "You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm," she told me once. That one stuck. The second thing I did was start writing. Nothing fancy, just a journal I kept on my nightstand. Every night I'd write one thing I was grateful for, even if it was small. Samantha washed the dishes today. Didn't get another threatening letter. Sunset looked nice through the blinds. It was dumb at first, but after a while I started noticing how much I'd been ignoring in the chaos. I also started working again. Not just going through the motions, but really working. Pouring myself into spreadsheets and forecasting models and client presentations. It was something I could control. Something that had rules unlike the mess my family left behind. Ironically, that focus got noticed. A senior partner pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "You've been different lately, sharper. You interested in taking on something bigger?" I almost said no, almost retreated into the shell I'd been living in. But then I thought about everything I'd survived. The silence, the lawsuits, the gaslighting. I said yes. The promotion came with more hours, more responsibility, but also more money. I didn't touch the inheritance. It sat in a separate account, untouched, while I rebuilt myself with my own effort, my own wins, my own sweat. Meanwhile, Samantha and I began to really talk not about money or lawsuits or the mess our father created, but about our lives. She told me how isolated she felt growing up, how their house was like a museum where she had to walk on eggshells, how their mom once told her that loyalty mattered more than truth, how she always knew about me but was told I abandoned the family for money and spite. "But that never made sense," she said one evening. "You were just a kid when it all happened. Kids don't abandon families. Families abandon them." It hit me like a brick because she wasn't just talking about me, she was talking about herself too. I helped her enroll in a community college nearby. She got a part-time job at a bookstore, started making friends. Slowly, she began to find her own rhythm, and I realized we weren't just surviving anymore. We were rebuilding quietly, brick by brick. But the peace didn't last long. One morning, I got an email from my lawyer with a subject line that made my stomach flip. "New submission in inheritance case. Key evidence filed." I clicked it open. Inside was a PDF attachment. I downloaded it expecting more of the same baseless accusations. But what I saw chilled me. It was an email exchange between my dad and my mom, dated 3 weeks before my grandfather passed. They were planning to split the inheritance. The messages were casual familiar, like this wasn't the first time they'd schemed together. Dad, he's still not updating the will, but he's old and confused. You know Andrew won't know what to do with it anyway. Mom, just keep pushing. Remind him how he promised to help you when he retired. Play the sympathy card. I'll talk to Marie. See if she can convince him to add something for me too. Dad, once it's settled, we'll split it. 60-40. I'm doing most of the heavy lifting here. Mom, 50-50. Don't be greedy. I felt sick, like the room tilted under me. They'd never been close. Barely spoke since the divorce. But apparently when money was involved, old enemies became allies. And suddenly, everything made sense. The coordinated pressure, the emotional manipulation, the lies, the smear campaign. This wasn't desperation. This was strategy. They thought Grandpa would bend to guilt, that they'd finally cash in after years of neglect. But he didn't. He chose me. And now they were punishing me for it. I sent the emails to my lawyer. He was stunned. This is huge. We can use this. And I knew we would. But I also knew something else. This wasn't just about court anymore. This was personal. They tried to erase me as a child, then they tried to exploit me as an adult. And when both failed, they came after my name, my integrity, my peace. But they made one mistake. They underestimated who I'd become when I had nothing left to lose. And if they thought they could scheme in the shadows without consequences, they were about to find out exactly what kind of man they'd created. There's a moment in every story where the balance tips, where survival becomes strategy and wounds become weapons. For me, that moment came sitting alone at my desk, rereading the email chain between my parents. Two people who hadn't spoken a kind word about each other in over 15 years suddenly united in trying to steal what wasn't theirs. That betrayal didn't hit me like a punch. It sank in slow, like ink spreading through paper. And once it did, it changed everything. For the first time in my life, I wasn't on the defensive. I wasn't dodging guilt trips or shaking under the weight of silence. I had power now, evidence, leverage, and not just legally, emotionally, because those emails weren't just about the will. They confirmed what I'd spent most of my life trying to forget, that I was never more than a bargaining chip to either of them, that they could scheme behind my back while pretending I was the problem. That their version of family was always transactional. I wasn't about to let them rewrite history and walk away clean. But I wasn't going to stoop to their level either. No public call-outs, no social media rants. I wanted something quieter, smarter, permanent. I wanted a reckoning so thorough they'd never mistake my kindness or my silence for weakness again. So I started planning. The first step was legal. I sent the email thread to my lawyer, a guy named Jordan, who looked like he belonged in a GQ spread, but talked like a math professor. He read the emails twice, then leaned back in his chair, laced his fingers behind his head, and said, "Well, this changes everything." Jordan moved fast. He filed a formal response to the lawsuit, attaching the emails and requesting the court dismiss the case based on clear evidence of bad faith and attempted manipulation. He also filed a counterclaim, defamation and emotional distress, backed by screenshots of the Facebook posts, the TikTok smear campaign, and the GoFundMe, which had raised nearly $11,000 under a web of lies. The best part: the donations were traceable. Names, amounts, dates. Some of them came from extended family members who had later sent me nasty messages. Once we filed, I knew the next hearing would be a turning point, but I didn't want to wait for justice to come from a courtroom. So I turned inward and started building my case outside the legal walls. I hired a private investigator. His name was Greg, ex-military, soft-spoken, with the kind of eyes that made you feel like he already knew the worst thing you'd ever done. I handed him a folder with every known detail about my parents, their addresses, known associates, business dealings, and most importantly, their financial histories. I wanted to know everything: who they owed money to, what kind of assets they were hiding, and whether this lawsuit was really about fairness or just good old-fashioned desperation. Greg didn't disappoint. Within 2 weeks, I had a dossier thicker than my old high school yearbook. My dad had taken out 3 personal loans in the past 2 years, all tied to a failing investment property in Arizona. One of the loans was co-signed by his wife Lynn, who, according to the investigator, had quietly filed for separation 3 months earlier. Apparently, money troubles had driven a wedge in their perfect little family. My mom was worse. She was 5 months behind on her rent, had 3 credit cards in collections, and was trying to launch an online spiritual coaching business that had exactly 0 clients. Her GoFundMe wasn't about survival, it was about lifestyle. She'd been spending donation money on spa treatments and designer handbags, hoping to rebrand herself as some kind of healing guru, while telling the internet I was letting her starve. It was disgusting, but also useful. I compiled everything into a timeline. Every lie, every scheme, every withdrawal. I didn't plan to use all of it, not yet. But I wanted to be ready. I wanted to know exactly how far they were willing to fall before they realized I'd stopped trying to catch them. The next step was the family. Not my family, theirs. Over the years, I'd distanced myself from most of my extended relatives, not out of malice but necessity. I was tired of pretending we had anything in common beyond shared blood. But now, I needed them to see the truth. Not the version my mom fed them in vague posts or whispered rumors, but the real truth. So I invited a few of them to lunch quietly separately. I didn't ambush them. I just asked for their time and told them I wanted to explain my side. One of the first people to agree was my Aunt Cheryl, my mom's older sister. She showed up to the cafe wearing oversized sunglasses and a guarded expression. I knew she'd seen the GoFundMe. I knew she probably believed it at least partially. But I also knew something else. Aunt Cheryl had always hated liars. I slid a printed copy of the email thread across the table, said nothing. She read it twice. Her face went pale. "This is real," she whispered. I nodded. I didn't need to say much after that. I let the truth do the heavy lifting. I showed her the donation trail, the texts my mom had sent me, the photos from her so-called eviction that were actually stock images pulled from Google. I watched as the narrative she'd clung to started to fracture in her mind. "You need to show people this," she said quietly. "They deserve to know." "I will," I told her, but not yet. I met with others too. My grandfather's neighbor who'd known me since I was a kid. My cousin Daniel who'd once tried to mediate during the fallout. Even Uncle Frank who used to call me Money Boy behind my back. One by one I showed them the same truth. And one by one they began to shift. Not everyone believed me right away. Some thought I'd fake the emails. Some still thought I should let it go for the sake of peace. But I didn't argue. I just let them choose their side in silence. Because when the time came, I wanted to know exactly who I was dealing with. In the meantime, I focused on my own life. I moved out of my old apartment, the one with all the bad memories, and into a small townhouse with space for an office and a guest room, which Samantha quickly claimed as her own. I upgraded my car, finally retiring the beat-up Honda I'd driven since college, and I started putting money towards something I never thought I'd have a future. I wasn't reckless. Most of the inheritance stayed untouched. But for the first time, I let myself live. I stopped shrinking to make other people comfortable. I stopped apologizing for what I'd been given. I stopped letting guilt choke the life out of me. And in that space, something surprising happened. I began to forgive myself. For surviving. For growing. For choosing peace over pain. For refusing to go back. But don't get me wrong, I hadn't forgotten. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, and it sure as hell isn't letting people walk away clean after what they 6 weeks from the day we filed the counterclaim. I started preparing the final piece of my plan. I began drafting letters. Not legal documents, not cease and desist notices. Letters, handwritten, personal, honest, one to my father, one to my mother, one to each of the extended relatives who'd attacked me online, one to the family friends who donated to the GoFundMe and then messaged me saying, "I hope you can sleep at night." Each letter told the same story. Mine. Without rage, without name-calling. Just the facts. The pain. The choices. The silence. And most importantly, the truth about the people who tried to manipulate an old man's legacy and then blamed me when it didn't go their way. I didn't plan to send them immediately, but I wanted them ready. I wanted them polished. Because when the time came, when the courtroom doors opened, and the lies collapsed under the weight of the truth, I wanted them to hear it from me. Not from a lawyer, not from a judge, from the boy they abandoned and the man he became. But there was one more piece left. Samantha. She'd been quiet for a while, keeping her head down, working her shifts and studying hard. But I could tell something was eating at her. One night I found her sitting in the kitchen with a blank notebook open in front of her. "What's up?" I asked. She looked up. Eyes red. "Do you think it's wrong if I testify?" I blinked. "Testify? In court? About Dad? About how he talks about you, how he planned all this?" "I still have the texts." I sat down across from her. "You do that." She nodded. "I want to." And just like that, the final piece clicked into place. I had the documents, the timeline, the paper trail, the emotional fallout, and now I had a witness. One they couldn't discredit. One they never saw coming. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Then let's do it. Because sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's built slowly, carefully, with intention. Sometimes it comes not in anger, but in clarity. And when it finally arrives, it doesn't need to announce itself. It just walks in, calm and unstoppable. And that moment was closer than they ever expected. It was raining the morning of the hearing. Not a storm, just a quiet, steady drizzle. The kind that makes the world feel softer than it is. I stood in front of the courthouse with my umbrella tucked under one arm, watching the gray sky blur the sharp edges of the buildings around me. Samantha stood beside me, clutching a small leather bag. Inside it were the texts from our father, the ones where he told her, "Don't talk to Andrew. He doesn't care about this family. He's just sitting on money that should have been ours." There were pages of them, cruel, calculated, condemning. She looked nervous, her knee bouncing slightly as we waited. "You still sure you want to do this?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "I've never been more sure of anything." We walked through the double doors side by side. Inside, the courtroom smelled like old paper and wood polish. Rows of pew-like benches lined the back, already filled with a handful of familiar faces. Aunt Marie sat quietly near the front, holding a folder on her lap. Behind her, my Uncle Frank, Aunt Cheryl, even my cousin Daniel, all people who had until recently believed the lies. Now they were here to see the truth unfold. My father sat across the aisle, his lawyer whispering into his ear. He looked tired, not the kind of tired that comes from age, but the kind that comes from being exposed. He didn't meet my eyes. My mother was in the second row behind his table. She wore a black dress like she was attending a funeral, complete with a dramatic scarf and oversized sunglasses. It was theatrical, almost laughable. I wondered if she'd practiced her expressions in the mirror that morning. The judge entered and the room rose. I won't walk you through every legal detail. There were motions, objections, statements. But what matters? What really matters is the moment the emails were presented. Jordan, my lawyer, stood with calm confidence. "Your Honor," he said, placing the printed emails on the evidence table. "We have reason to believe this case is not only baseless, but fraudulent in intent. These communications between the plaintiff and a third party clearly demonstrate a premeditated attempt to influence the deceased's will for personal gain, followed by a coordinated campaign to pressure my client after the fact." The judge raised an eyebrow, skimming the pages. "Your father and your mother?" he asked, directing the question toward me. I nodded. "They've been working together behind my back for months. Not just working together," Jordan added. "Planning to split the inheritance, discredit my client, and manipulate extended family for financial support. We've also submitted a supplemental exhibit, an analysis of public fundraising tied to provably false claims. That was the GoFundMe." The room went still. My mother shifted uncomfortably, the scarf suddenly looking more like a noose. My father's lawyer paled. Then Samantha stood. "I'd like to testify." The judge allowed it. She took the stand and spoke clearly, calmly. She told them about the pressure, the phone calls, the anger when she refused to lie. She read texts word for word. The courtroom wasn't big, but in that moment it felt like everyone was holding their breath. When she finished, the judge leaned forward, fingers steepled. "Do you believe your father's intentions in filing this suit were genuine?" "No," Samantha said. "He wanted money. That's all it ever was." The judge nodded slowly, then turned back to Jordan. "Do you have any further evidence to submit?" Jordan smiled. "Just a final statement, Your Honor." He paused, glancing briefly at me. "There are many kinds of family, Your Honor. Some of us are born into them. Some of us build them ourselves. My client was not fought for as a child. He was not called. He was not cared for. And yet the moment he came into something valuable, he was surrounded by claims of love, obligation, and guilt. This isn't just about money. It's about manipulation and the right to peace." The judge sat back, and then, in one quiet, measured voice, he delivered the verdict. Case dismissed with prejudice. He added that the court found strong indications of attempted fraud and bad faith litigation, and encouraged my legal team to pursue damages should the defendant choose to do so. The room shifted. Whispered gasps, movement. My mother took off her sunglasses and stared at the judge like he'd spoken a different language. My father just looked down as if he'd known deep down that this would be the end. And it was. Not just the end of the case, but the end of their control. Because what happened after the verdict was something they couldn't undo. I released the letters, every one of them, folded into stamped envelopes, sent to every friend, relative, and supporter who'd believed the narrative they'd spun. I didn't gloat, I didn't rage, I simply told the story. I shared the emails, the screenshots, the legal dismissal, and most importantly, the truth that I had been left behind. Not once, but over and over again, and that I had survived. The fallout came quickly. The GoFundMe was reported and taken down within 24 hours. Donors began demanding refunds. One even threatened to sue my mom for fraud. Her spiritual coaching website went dark a week later. Friends unfollowed her. Comments disappeared. Her name, once used to paint me as heartless, started to vanish from conversations altogether. As for my dad, Lynn finalized her separation, sold their house, moved across the country with her daughters. Samantha told me he tried calling her for weeks after the hearing, leaving voicemails full of apologies, guilt trips, and desperation. She never answered. He moved out of state shortly after. Rumor has it he's renting a room in someone's basement, working part-time for a landscaping company. And me, I lived. Not extravagantly, not to make a point, just fully. Honestly. I paid off Aunt Marie's mortgage. Quietly. No fanfare, no announcement. Just a wire transfer and a note that said, "Thank you for fighting for me when no one else did." She cried when she called me, and I let her. For once, the tears weren't from pain. Samantha finished her program and got a job in publishing. She moved into her own apartment last spring, but still comes over every Sunday for dinner. She insists on bringing dessert. Always too much. Always enough to remind me I'm not alone. And the inheritance, it's still there, most of it untouched. I invested some, donated some, but I never let it define me, because my grandfather didn't leave me that money to fix the past. He left it because he saw my future, because he believed in me when no one else did. And I won't waste that. People still ask me if I regret not making peace with my parents, if I ever feel guilty about how things turned out. I don't. Because peace isn't pretending. It isn't silence. It isn't letting someone hurt you just because they share your last name. Peace is knowing the truth. And mine is simple. They left me behind, and I moved forward. Alone at first, but never again. And that finally is enough.